In just 47 seconds, Jasmine Crockett cracked open a red envelope, revealing a $3.1 million cover-up that Donald Trump paid to hide a secret daughter. The courtroom didn't explode, it froze. A president's name, a DNA match, and a letter that read, "You were never supposed to exist." What kind of empire spends millions just to erase a child? The hearing room didn't hum. It didn't buzz. It waited. There was something unnatural about the air, like a storm had already passed through, and no one dared acknowledge what it left behind. The flag stood too still. The microphones blinked like sniper dots. C-SPAN was live, every network locked in, yet the silence felt louder than any broadcast could carry. Donald Trump stepped into the chamber not like a witness, but like a man stepping onto a game show stage. His stride was loose, chin-high, navy suit, unwrinkled tie, perfect to the pixel. He paused, flashed a rehearsed smirk to the press pool, and gave a half-hearted wave to the cameras. He looked like a man too familiar with control, too sure that nothing could touch him. Not here, not now. The murmurs around the room weren't chatter, they were calculation. A few Republican members chuckled as he passed. One offered a mock salute. Another leaned back in his chair and checked his watch. Aides along the marble perimeter whispered behind folders. They weren't expecting fire today. Just another dance, a show, paper shuffling, political posturing, and then lunch. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't rise. She didn't nod. She didn't blink. She sat frozen, her posture razor sharp, her gaze locked ahead, like she was staring through someone, not at them. Her right hand rested gently atop a crimson envelope. Not thick, but heavy. Not loud, but dangerous. Its color didn't match her suit or the decor or the decorum. It looked more like a threat than a document, like blood sealed in paper. The room hadn't noticed it yet, but it would. Because inside that envelope was something that had cost $3.1 million to bury, and in less than 47 seconds, Jasmine Crockett was going to tear it open live on national television. What kind of truth cost that much to hide, and who paid for the silence? At exactly 12:47 p.m., the red tally lights flared on like a synchronized detonation. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all blinking in unison, turning the chamber into a national coliseum. The time wasn't random. It was chosen. Jasmine Crockett had waited 3 weeks for this 5-minute slot, the moment when America was most awake, most watching, most unprepared. Across the aisle, Trump adjusted his cuffs and leaned back as if preparing to tune out another irrelevant Democrat with too many folders and not enough punch. But Jasmine didn't fumble with papers. She didn't clear her throat. She just moved her hand, slowly. Her thumb slid beneath the flap of the crimson envelope, lifting it with the careful control of someone disarming a trap. The air shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. A few staffers straightened in their seats without realizing why. One camera zoomed tighter on her face. Another caught the precise moment the envelope opened, not with a tear, but with a snap. A paper whisper that landed like a trigger. She didn't look down as she pulled the document free. She looked at him, not with anger, not even disgust, just precision. One sheet of paper, white background, 2 names, black ink. Jasmine turned to the chairman and requested permission to present new evidence under sealed ethics override. Granted. She lifted the sheet, and on the giant screen behind her, 2 words exploded across the marble walls: Emily Santos. Beneath it, 98% paternity match. Donald J. Trump. Trump blinked. The air didn't move. Someone dropped a pen in the gallery. It hit the floor like a gunshot. Jasmine didn't flinch. This wasn't speculation. This was blood. And for the first time, Trump had nothing to say. What kind of legacy unravels with a name that was never meant to be spoken? She didn't raise her voice. She didn't point. She simply leaned forward, eyes locked on the former president, and asked calmly, clearly deadly, Mr. Trump, do you know what Samaritan Ventures is? The question landed like a blade slipped beneath the ribs. Trump tilted his head, confused, or pretending to be. He chuckled, that familiar scoff Americans had heard 100 times when he wanted to make something go away with arrogance alone. No idea. Sounds like a fake charity, he muttered, smirking at the cameras, like he was still in control. But this wasn't a rally. This was a reckoning. Jasmine blinked once unfazed. It's a shell company registered in Delaware. No employees, no product. Just one wire transfer. April 3rd, 2001. Amount $3,100,000. The smirk on Trump's face began to tremble. Jasmine didn't stop. The recipient was Maria Santos, a domestic worker at Mar-a-Lago. That payment arrived 19 days before her fatal accident. A stairwell collapse. No witnesses, no cameras, no autopsy. Silence folded around the chamber like concrete. A congressional aide near the rear slowly removed his glasses. One senator rubbed her temples. Jasmine's voice dropped to a whisper sharper than a scream. That money didn't buy silence. It bought erasure. The question is erasure of what? On the screen, a grainy photo of a young Maria holding an infant girl flickered into view. Emily, in a hospital room, unlabeled, undocumented. Trump stared at it like he'd seen a ghost, and America watched breathless. Why would a man pay millions just to erase a name he once whispered? Before she was a scandal, Maria Santos was a shadow moving through marble halls, with a cart and gloves, changing sheets that smelled like money and secrets. She didn't speak much English, but she knew enough to follow orders, to disappear when needed, to never ask questions. Then one day in late March, an envelope arrived under her door at Mar-a-Lago. Inside, a cashier's check for $3.1 million and a typed note with no name, no greeting. Just 6 words. Don't say my name. Stay quiet. Maria didn't scream. She didn't run. She packed a small suitcase, booked a one-way bus ticket to Houston, and left without saying goodbye to anyone. She told her sister she was going to start over. She told her daughter to finish her cereal. She told no one where the money came from. But she knew. You could see it in the way she stopped answering calls from old co-workers, in the way she unplugged her landline, in the way she crossed the street when a black car idled too long at the corner. 19 days later, she was found at the bottom of a stairwell behind a dry cleaner 2 blocks from her apartment. No witnesses, no security footage, no autopsy. Cause of death, accidental fall. Her death was processed like paperwork, filed, stamped, and closed within 72 hours. No headlines, no flags, just a quiet cremation paid in cash. Only one thing was left behind: a child, and a secret worth millions. What kind of truth dies? When the woman who carried it can't speak anymore. Emily Santos didn't have a father. Not on paper, not in stories. Just a blank line on her birth certificate and a silence that stretched longer than most children could understand. Every time she asked her Aunt Rosa Maria's older sister would say the same thing: your mama loved you enough for 2. But love couldn't explain why no man ever showed up to her birthdays, why no pictures of a father existed in the house, why her mother flinched every time a political ad came on TV and showed a certain face. It wasn't until Emily turned 12 that Rosa slipped once. They were folding laundry when Emily pointed to a photo, her mother young in uniform, smiling. There was a man's shadow on the wall behind her. Who's that? Emily asked. Rosa hesitated. Then quietly, he was a man with yellow hair. He came once, then never again. Emily laughed. It sounded like a fairy tale, but Rosa didn't laugh with her. 2 years later, the wood beneath the floorboards in Maria's old bedroom creaked loose during a storm. Emily, then 14, pulled it up with a butter knife. Beneath it, a cracked plastic bag faded from heat. Inside, an old hospital wristband, a Mar-a-Lago guest towel, and a torn piece of linen paper with one handwritten line she can never know. The initials at the bottom were barely legible, but they were there. DJT. Emily held that paper for hours before folding it away. She didn't cry, because somehow she already knew. What kind of father erases his child? Before she can speak her own name, Jasmine Crockett didn't go to El Paso for a headline. She went for a ghost, the kind that doesn't haunt houses but hospital records, insurance claims, and missing case files that were never supposed to be read. In a modest duplex near the border, she met Lena Herrera, a woman with hands that trembled and eyes that had memorized silence. Lena had worked with Maria Santos for 6 years, first at the resort, then briefly at a private cleaning service funded by a shell nonprofit called Samaritan Ventures. Jasmine didn't ask direct questions. She let the silence stretch until Lena cracked first. She was scared, Lena whispered. She kept saying, if anything happened, it wouldn't be an accident. Jasmine didn't breathe. 2 nights before she died, Maria told me she thought someone had followed her home. She even wrote a name down, said it was the one they said never to speak. Lena looked away, lips shaking. I never saw that paper again. Jasmine's hands tightened around her notebook, not because she was shocked, but because the math was finally adding up, and it didn't lead to coincidence. It led to motive. On the flight back to D.C., the cabin lights dimmed, turbulence thumped underfoot, and she sat alone in 18C writing one sentence over and over in the margin of her notes. If truth bleeds, this will be a flood. Because Maria Santos didn't fall, she was removed. And if one mother was erased to protect a name, how many others are alive today, never knowing who they truly are? She walked into the chamber like she wasn't supposed to be there. Dr. Alicia Rowe, lab coat traded for a Navy suit badge, clipped at her waist, eyes hollow from 2 decades of keeping a secret no one was supposed to carry. Her name didn't appear in headlines, but her signature had once floated across a sealed DNA report that could have shifted the weight of a presidency. Jasmine Crockett gave a slight nod as Alicia sat down. The camera zoomed in, not on her face, but on the trembling fingers that clutched a gray envelope. 20 years ago, she had been fresh out of med school, recruited by a private diagnostics firm, subcontracted by the Trump Organization. The job paid well, the results were confidential, and the names, well, they were powerful. One night she received a paternity test marked urgent. 2 samples. One belonged to Donald J. Trump, the other to an infant girl with no listed guardian. The match came back 98%. What followed wasn't science, it was a command. She was told to destroy the files, shred the paper, wipe the drives, forget the girl's name. A man in a gray suit said it wasn't her business. You're just a technician, he muttered. Forget what you saw. But Alicia didn't forget. She printed a second copy, sealed it, hid it behind drywall in her aunt's attic under a fake water pipe permit. Now, 20 years later, she opened the envelope in front of Congress. And as she unfolded the yellowing report, her voice did not shake. How many people were paid to forget this girl ever existed? And why did one woman refuse? The screen behind Jasmine lit up white, sterile, undeniable. A single page filled the chamber wall, a DNA report stamped with federal insignia dated 2 decades prior. In bold beneath the chemical code and bar graph, 99.98% match subject A, Donald John Trump. Subject B, Emily Santos. Gasps cracked through the silence like dropped glass. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. The report spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Trump surged to his feet, his chair screeching behind him. Red-faced voice cracking, he roared across the hearing room. This is fake. This is a lie. That's not even real. I've never seen that paper in my life. Cameras pivoted. Flashbulbs exploded. But Jasmine stayed seated, calm, cold, waiting for the storm to spend itself. When his voice dropped to a hoarse growl, she finally spoke. If that's true, Mr. Trump, she said, holding up a second sheet, then why does the FBI's Forensic Handwriting Division confirm this letter? She turned it toward the screen, was written by you. It was the note found in Maria's bedroom. She can never know. The signature at the bottom identical to the one on Trump's old Mar-a-Lago payroll checks. Dated, authenticated, and matched with 97.6% certainty by 3 federal examiners. The blow didn't land like a punch. It landed like a confession that had always been hiding in plain sight. Jasmine let the silence stretch again. Because paper can be denied, but blood can't. So why did a man known for never writing letters write one he couldn't afford to be read? The letter appeared on screen like a scar finally reopened. Faded ink, wrinkled folds, a single sentence typed on linen paper, cold and precise. You were never supposed to exist, but I'll make sure you're cared for. Don't say my name. DJT. The room didn't erupt, it recoiled, as if the words themselves carried weight no one wanted to touch. Jasmine didn't add commentary. She didn't need to. That letter wasn't a question, it was a verdict. Across the aisle, Trump's legal team scrambled. One attorney, Rowe's voice trembling with urgency. Madam Chair, I move that this letter be stricken from the official record. It's hearsay. It's inadmissible. The chairman blinked unsure. Jasmine leaned forward. Not with anger, but with finality. "You can strike the paper," she said, "but you can't strike her blood." The cameras caught the moment, the flicker in Trump's eye, the sudden stiffness in his jaw, the way his hand tightened around the water glass, like it might shatter. Because what once was a private warning was now public evidence. A sentence meant to disappear had survived, hidden behind drywall smuggled across 2 decades sealed in silence. But now it screamed louder than any gavel: "You were never supposed to exist." That wasn't just fear, that was guilt in prose. And when power writes a secret to erase a child, what happens when that child finally reads it aloud? She stepped into the hearing room like a ripple cutting across still water, small, deliberate, unstoppable. Emily Santos, clad in a simple Navy nurse's uniform, her ID badge clipped to her chest like armor. She wasn't famous, not political, not rehearsed, but every camera in the room swiveled toward her, as if gravity had shifted. Her hands trembled, but her spine didn't. She didn't scan the room. She looked only at one man. Trump froze, not with rage this time, but something older, more human. Recognition. He knew that face. Not from tabloids or courtrooms, but from a photo once crumpled in his desk drawer. Jasmine gave no introduction. She simply nodded toward the microphone. Emily stepped forward, cleared her throat once, and spoke. "I didn't ask to be his daughter," she said softly, her voice slicing through the silence like a scalpel. "But he made me his secret." A murmur swept through the crowd. Senators shifted. Reporters lowered their pens as if something sacred had just broken open. Emily didn't cry. She didn't flinch. "I spent my life wondering why I didn't belong. Why my mother cried when the news played his face. Why we moved every 6 months and never stayed near water." She paused, eyes steady. "Now I know. I was never meant to exist publicly, just privately, conveniently, invisibly." And across the room, the man who branded himself as untouchable could not look his own daughter in the eye. When truth becomes a person, what excuse does power have left? The paper shook in her hands, but her voice did not. Emily Santos stood at the center of a marble room where presidents had once denied wars, but today she read something far more personal. Jasmine Crockett stood just behind her, silent, unmoving, a sentinel in heels. The cameras, zoomed in the nation, leaned forward. And then Emily spoke the sentence that had never been meant for ears beyond a dead woman's dresser drawer. "You were never supposed to exist." She read, her voice cracking just once before regaining strength. "But I'll make sure you're cared for. Don't say my name. DJT." It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a performance. It was the shattering of silence, shaped into syllables, carried live into 19 million homes. A room full of seasoned politicians and hardened press froze, not at the content, but at the tone. It didn't sound like revenge. It sounded like release. Jasmine's eyes never left Emily, not once. She didn't interrupt. She didn't glance at Trump. Her job wasn't to protect Emily. It was to hold the space where Emily could finally breathe. And in that stillness, with the letter held up for the world to see, something shifted. Not in the walls, not in the polls, but in the man who once wrote those words like an escape clause. Because now the daughter he tried to erase had just engraved herself into history. What happens when the child meant to be forgotten becomes the one the world refuses to forget? She folded the letter, laid it gently on the table, and looked straight into the lens of the live broadcast. No teleprompter, no handler. Just raw truth standing taller than any lie ever whispered in marble halls. "I'm done hiding," Emily said, her voice steadier now. "My name is Emily Santos. I exist." The silence that had ruled the chamber for nearly an hour shattered in a single heartbeat. Gasps spread like wildfire. A few Republican senators stood abruptly, papers clutched to their chests, and filed out in stiff lines, some with furrowed brows, others with eyes glued to their phones. One aide dropped a folder. Another covered her mouth in disbelief, but none of them could stop what had already ignited. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't thank anyone. She simply stood her ground as if her very breath had just rewritten the rules of the room. Jasmine stepped closer, leaned in without taking her eyes off the girl who just flipped history on its spine. Her whisper wasn't for Emily, but for the microphone, the nation, the ones still pretending not to know. And now, the silence has a name. There was no applause, just the weight of something irreversible hanging in the air. And behind every blink of the camera, shudders behind every slow exhale, from stunned lawmakers, one question began to swell like a storm. If the daughter they tried to erase has returned, what other buried truths are clawing their way out of the dark? The screen behind Jasmine flickered once, then bloomed into a spiderweb of glowing red wires and offshore accounts. The room dimmed as if the light itself recoiled from what was being revealed. Jasmine didn't explain. She let the numbers speak first. Cayman Islands, Panama, Zurich. Names disguised in codes, dates that match campaign speeches, wire transfers masked as charitable donations. The crowd squinted, but the pattern was brutal in its precision. Every time Trump preached family values into a microphone, $40,000 was quietly routed to an account tagged eSantosMed. Jasmine circled the timeline with a laser pointer, like a surgeon tracing old scars. He wasn't just hiding her, she said coldly. He was paying her to exist. Quietly. The phrase hung in the air like a verdict. A child acknowledged in balance sheets but not in breath. Reporters scribbled wildly. Staffers whispered. A senator in the third row leaned forward and muttered, "Oh my God." But Jasmine wasn't done. She stepped aside, revealing a diagram. Trump International accounts wired money to a shell company, which then paid rent on a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Emily's apartment. The same one her mother died in, the same one sealed without warning after the funeral. This isn't just guilt, Jasmine said, her voice sharpening. It's infrastructure. An entire financial system built to bury one girl, under the weight of someone else's power. But if the wires point to shame, how far back do they go? And who else was paid to stay silent? Jasmine's next slide wasn't numbers. It was a face bloodied, bruised, barely conscious in a hospital bed. The name beneath it hit like a hammer: Jake Mendoza, award-winning investigative journalist, 3 Emmys, 2 broken ribs, one story that almost got him killed. He wasn't chasing gossip. He was chasing the one name no newsroom dared whisper: Samaritan Ventures. And the day he got too close, his brakes failed on the I-95. The room shifted, eyebrows raised, phones lit up. Jasmine continued, her voice colder now. 3 weeks before his crash, Mendoza emailed a draft report to 3 colleagues. All 3 lost access to their inboxes within 24 hours. 2 were reassigned. 1 quit journalism entirely. Then she dropped the match, a leaked memo stamped with the Department of Homeland Security seal. It read, "Neutralize Mendoza. Quietly. Discredit if possible. Contain if not." Gasps erupted. This wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a machine. One that protected not just a man, but a legacy built on fear, money, and silencing the wrong questions. Jasmine turned to the committee, locking eyes with each one like a slow roll call of conscience. This was never about family values, she said. This was about keeping a ghost invisible by making sure anyone who saw her didn't survive long enough to tell it. So if Samaritan Ventures had the power to make reporters disappear, what did they fear was still out there waiting to be uncovered? The doors to the hearing room creaked open, not from behind the committee bench, but from the public gallery. A man in a wrinkled gray suit stepped forward, unannounced, unnoticed until now. The air tensed as security moved to intercept, but Jasmine raised a hand. "Let him speak," she said quietly. Cameras pivoted. The man adjusted, his Thai voice cracking as he leaned into the mic. "My name is Victor Halberd. I was Donald Trump's legal fixer until 2018, and I've kept quiet long enough." The room froze. Halberd reached into his coat slowly, like drawing a confession from bone, and unfolded a list. 7 names, all women, all tied to the Trump organization by NDA, wire transfer, or blood. Emily, he said, wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. He paused, tapping one name. "This one, Isabella M., vanished in 2017. No death certificate, no trace, just gone." The list trembled in his hand, but his eyes stayed fixed on Trump, who now looked smaller than his shadow. Jasmine took the paper like it weighed more than truth itself. "How many more were erased?" she asked, not to Halberd, but to the silence behind him. The silence that had kept empires clean and voices dead. Gasps rippled. Senators whispered. A staffer near the back dropped their tablet. No one moved to help. The courtroom had just turned into a burial ground where names were tombstones and silence was the soil. If Emily was only one, how many more daughters were paid to disappear before the world learned to ask? The chamber no longer felt like marble. It pulsed like a beating heart held together by tension and the weight of what had just been spoken. The chairwoman leaned into her mic, voice tight with gravity. This committee will now vote on whether to refer former President Donald J. Trump for criminal investigation regarding perjury, obstruction, and concealment of a living descendant. The red tally lights blinked back to life as if they too were holding their breath. One by one, names were called. Each eye struck like a bell tolling through history. Then it came Senator Kirkland, Republican from Ohio. He paused, his jaw clenched, eyes glassy. The room leaned forward like a single body. Yes, he whispered, and a tear rolled down his cheek. You could feel something fracture in the room, not politics, but protection. The final count rang out 9 votes for referral, 4 against. A hush swept the chamber, not silence, but stunned recalibration. Jasmine stood not with triumph, but with clarity. This isn't just victory, she said, voice low but resonant. It's repair. For every daughter erased, for every truth buried under gold and fear. Her hand trembled slightly as she gathered the files, not from weakness, but because history for once had weight. But if power can be voted down, can the damage it caused ever truly be counted? Outside the Capitol, the air crackled like a live wire stretched between past and reckoning. A sea of people had flooded the steps, shoulder to shoulder, their chants ricocheting off stone and glass. Emily Maria. The names weren't just shouted, they were lifted like hymns, like the names of saints that someone had tried to bury. Homemade signs waved above the crowd. Truth has a daughter, she exists, you can't pay silence forever. Camera crews climbed scaffolds, drones buzzed overhead, and every major network cut to the street scene, labeling it the Reckoning March. A teenage girl on her father's shoulders held a poster with a red envelope and the words, "We see her now." The movement had no official leader, no coordinated organizer. It was raw, electric, organic. America wasn't just watching anymore. It was showing up. Jasmine stepped through the Capitol's front steps, not like a politician, but like a witness. She held a single photo above her head. Maria Santos in her Mar-a-Lago uniform, smiling beside a baby Emily. The crowd fell into a hush, so sudden you could hear the snapping of flags in the wind. Justice, Jasmine said into the megaphone, doesn't whisper. It shows up. It fights back. And today it remembers her name. But if this is the beginning of remembering, how many names have we already forgotten? The lights in the CNN primetime studio bathed Emily in a pale, steady glow, like a truth finally allowed to exist in the open. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. No child, she said slowly, deliberately, should ever be told she was a mistake. Not by a system, not by a father, and not by a country that claims to stand for family. America didn't blink. It leaned in. In living rooms across the nation, people sat motionless, some with hands over mouths, others with phones recording the screen. Within minutes, the hashtag #Jurshag erased but here trended globally. Teenagers stitched TikToks to it. Veterans tweeted it next to folded flags. A therapist in Ohio posted, "My patient cried," and said, "That girl just said the words I never could." Emily reached into her blazer pocket and held up the letter, the one with her name crossed out. Her existence denied, her birth reduced to liability. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She simply looked into the camera, tore the paper in half, and let the pieces fall like dead leaves. In the audience, Jasmine sat off camera, her fingers pressed to her lips, eyes shimmering, not with rage but with pride. Emily didn't just reclaim her story, she rewrote it on live television. And if the truth is no longer sealed in envelopes, but projected like moonlight across the sky, who among us still dares to pretend they don't see it? He didn't wait for cameras. He didn't speak to reporters. No press conference. No fist-pumping defiance. Donald Trump exited the Capitol alone, a single Secret Service agent trailing silently behind. The afternoon light sliced across the marble steps, casting his figure like a shadow, fleeing something larger than guilt, something irreversible. There were no chants this time. No angry mobs. Just the sound of his own shoes, tapping down the stone, each step slower than the last. His shoulders, once squared for spectacle, now slumped inwards. The door closed behind him, but the air didn't move. The weight he left behind wasn't just political, it was generational. Inside a quiet studio across town, Emily Santos sat watching the broadcast. Her lips didn't tremble, her hands didn't shake. She simply laid her palm against her chest, one steady breath, like someone surfacing after years underwater. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. Because for the first time in her life, she didn't have to. But when the most powerful man in the world leaves without a word, what truth just walked in to take his place? The cover hit newsstands at dawn, Time magazine, bold red frame, white background, and in the center, Emily's face, unretouched, unafraid. The headline read like an epitaph, rewritten, the daughter they erased. It wasn't just a story, it was a reckoning. The kind that doesn't fade in 24-hour cycles. The kind carved into memory like truth finally refusing to whisper. In a dimly lit office high above D.C., Jasmine Crockett sat alone, sleeves rolled, papers strewn across her desk like remnants of battle. The Capitol was quiet now, but her mind still echoed with every name, every silence, every buried truth that clawed its way into daylight. A single photo rested by her keyboard, her mother's smile frozen in time, eyes kind, posture proud. Jasmine reached out fingers, brushing the frame like it was warm. She didn't speak at first, only stared. Then, as if confessing not to the room, but to the legacy she carried, she whispered, "Silence is a weapon." But today, it broke. Outside, the city breathed like something had shifted, subtle but permanent. Truth had been signed not in ink, but in voice, in blood, in airwaves. And now that the lie is broken, what happens to the empire it built? The message arrived at 2:17 a.m. No name, no subject, just 5 words on a black screen. Keep going. 7 more. Jasmine read it once, then again. Her breath didn't quicken, but her spine straightened, like her body had already accepted what her mind hadn't yet said aloud. It wasn't over. It had barely begun. She closed the laptop with a soft click and rose from her chair. Outside Capitol Hill slept under a veil of floodlights, polished marble masking the weight of a truth that had finally cracked its seal. She didn't flinch. Not anymore. The path ahead wasn't lit, but it was real, and it had a name now. 7 names, maybe more. As she stepped through the heavy wooden doors of Congress once again, the cameras found her not by chase, but by gravity. Her gaze was calm, unshaken, locked not on her opponents, but on the nation watching behind the lens. Her voice was low but unbreakable. If truth has a face, then will America finally dare to look? And as the screen faded to black, a final question echoed, not in politics, but in all of us. Have you ever stayed silent out of fear? And if so, isn't it time to speak your own truth, because she wasn't erased? She became the echo. Some truths were buried not because they were wrong, but because no one dared to keep the light on them. Emily stood up. Jasmine didn't look away. What about you? Have you ever stayed silent when the truth needed a voice? Share it below. Someone out there might be waiting just to hear yours. If this story stirred something deep, don't scroll past it. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where erased names are remembered and silence is never the end. Hit the bell, because the next truth we uncover might be yours. What part of Emily's story stayed with you? Drop it in the comments, because your voice might be the one that sets someone else free. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. The truth isn't finished, it's just waiting for someone brave enough to listen and bold enough to speak.